Restream. And click here if at any time view the posts to view the post on Restream.io. Okay, so can't find supported channels enabled. That figures. Well, I have no idea if this is actually streaming out. So I don't even know where to move everything now. Well, it's all set. I think I did what I was supposed to do, so we will find out, and we'll end up editing. Confirm your email address. I have no idea. Okay. Okay. You know, this is just so annoying to me. Stream quality has been automatically lowered because the internet connection was not fast enough. So when I end up suing Lennar, because they sold me on this being a smart house and it's going to have the fastest internet connection in the world.
Right.
Yeah, I can't, but it may be adequate for our purposes. So I am going to go to Restream chat. I have no type of message. Okay, well, what time is it?
It is 5 minutes to the top.
Yeah, well, we could start early.
Sure.
This should be streaming. There shouldn't be anything else that I need to do. So, welcome everybody to CRE Radio and TV. I'm your host, Howard Kline, and I have with me my co-host, Peter Morris, and today we are going to be talking about what you should expect from a real estate broker. So if you're watching live, we're not going to be right back. But if you're watching this on a recording, we'll be right back. How do you like that? And so next time, hopefully, I will have that intro built in. So why don't we switch here to Peter Morris? I guess maybe not.
You don't need to
we got you, Peter. All right. Now, as long as you can hear me fine, because I've got the new microphone and audio mixer set up. Got that working about 25 minutes ago.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, Howard. How are you today?
I am fine. So, Peter, why don't you introduce yourself and squeeze in that little caveat to today's show?
Certainly. Good day, everybody. My name is Peter Morris. I'm the CEO and founder of the Greenstead Consulting Group. We are an international commercial real estate advisory firm working with owners, developers, and investors of commercial real estate as well as occupiers of real estate. And for today's purposes, I want everybody to know that I'm a former broker. I'm no longer a broker. I just work on consulting and advisory basis. But also, I'm going to bring the perspective to the conversation today as a client, because I was also the chief operating officer for a publicly traded REIT. So I was buying brokerage services. So I've been on both sides of the equation, and I'll sometimes take the position of what exactly does the client really, really, really want?
So we're both going to do that, as a matter of
Yes.
fact. And as I indicated earlier, I'm Howard Kline. I am currently a real estate agent in Nevada with SVN, the Equity Group. I've been a real estate broker twice in California, and I've been a real estate agent in New York once, going back to the mid-1980s. I've also been a commercial real estate attorney for almost 43 years now, and I have plenty of white hair, and I did have long hair, but on top of my head when I started practicing law. So That's what it did to me. It had nothing to do with genetics. So I had posted online an outline of what we were going to talk about. And basically, we're going to be using ourselves, both good and bad. I'm the good, you're the bad, Peter. No,
Okay.
no. But we're going to look at what we expect from ourselves and what we think the services and the quality and the volume that we should be delivering. And in this particular case, most of what we hear about in terms of training for brokers is how to find new business. So in this show, it's really going to be addressed to buyers, tenants, landlords, sellers, and other brokers and brokerage companies so that they understand and focus on the kind of quality that we expect from ourselves and other brokers. So, Peter, let me throw you a curveball.
Okay.
Why don't you start out with what you expect of yourself, the best case scenario? And I don't know about you, but I don't always meet those expectations, but that's what I strive for. So you go ahead and you start with that.
Well, you just stole my thunder because it's an ideal. When Kobe Bryant plays basketball, he always strives for the very best. If I go all the way back to the 1923s, there's this gentleman called Babe Ruth. You may have heard of him, Howard. The home run king of MLB back in 1923. That was a record that he held. He also held the record of the most strikeouts in 1923 as well. But here's the thing about Babe Ruth, and this is the way that I try to approach my business, and I'll talk more specifically about my business after the analogy. But, when Babe Ruth stepped up to the plate, he never bunted the ball. He never looked for a base hit. He was always, always, always going for the home run. So he was always striving for the very best that he could be. And for me, it isn't a function of transaction. In fact, I had one client tell me that I was going to go broke as a broker because I cared too much. I cared too much about the deal and I cared too much about the client. But I walk into every transaction, and now that I'm a client buyer, I expect this of my service providers. And as a consultant, as of a trainer, I keep telling real estate brokers, you really have to think like the owner, and you have to hold their best interests at heart. If you look at the definition of agency, which is what we all give when we're a real estate agent, we get agency. The legal definition of agency is we are the same as our client, and we are acting in their best interest. So we have a fiduciary duty as well as agency. And incumbent with that is that mindset that you have to do your very best. You can't just hang a sign and wait for the phone to ring.
No, I agree with you. It's for me, one, I don't like to be average. So I'm constantly striving to not say that I'm different from other people, actually be different so that I can distinguish myself. So that when I go to a client or I go to a brokerage or I go to anyone, I'm going, okay, this is what you're getting from me. If you can get it from someone else, great. But what you're getting from me is this, and this is where I believe that I'm different. Two, I always believe in giving 120%. And it's interesting. My wife criticized me as trying to be a perfectionist, and it's true. I strive for perfection.
Yeah.
I think I've hit it once, maybe in my entire life. I think I've hit it once. And I like to tell this story about a time where I was general counsel for Allied Education Corporation, and we got involved. The CEO and the CFO got us involved in this deal, and it was about a $25 million deal. And, they didn't do their due diligence ahead of time.
Ouch.
And there was an issue with whether or not we were selling or we were buying more than 50% of our partner. I mean, that's really what it came down to. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but suffice it to say that I ended up hiring, I was the lead attorney. I hired two other law firms, each of which brought different skills and connections to the table. Because in
Mhm.
Washington, D.C., connections is very, very important.
Yes, very much so.
And everything, we prepared ourselves we prepared exactly what our presentation was going to be. We were prepared for a number of different scenarios. Our optimum was that they were going to respond in a certain way. And as a consequence, we would come back and make another offer, and then they would respond and give us exactly what we wanted.
Right.
So our plan one went perfectly. It was almost like they were reading our papers. They had been listening to our preparation, and they did exactly what we wanted. And when we walked out the door, now I'm dealing with some very high level, very sophisticated Washington lawyers, and we all looked at each other like, did that really happen? You know,
And that's bonus when it does happen like
well,
that.
yeah. When I'm on stage and I do theater, or when I even do this, there are times where I generally rate myself. All right. And I try for 100%. I want to hit that grand slam around the world.
Well, if you look at any craftsman, and it's going to sound funny, but I consider myself craftsman within the real estate world. If you look at any craftsman, they don't just put up good enough. They put up their very best. And I remember when my son, who's long since left school, graduated high school, graduated university, and is well launched into his career. But I remember him back in high school. We had one of those parent-teacher conferences, and the teacher said, your son is giving 110% work for a project that is only worth 5% of his final grade. And so he has to temper that. And my retort to the teacher was, how do you tell someone who is passionate about what they're doing to dial it back? And when I hear you speaking about, you wanting to give 110 or 120%, I'm the same way, but a lot of, and it sounds like a trite comment, oh, I give 110%. A lot of people can walk in and do that. But what I think differentiates that broker as a buyer of that service, I can sense it immediately, is that broker that comes with a passion, a person that is really passionate about what it is that they're doing, about the industry that they're in, and passionate about providing their client with the type of service that they themselves want to receive. So it's the passion that I think that sets people apart when you're talking 110, 120%. Because if you don't have the passion, you're not going to give 110, 120%.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking, my wife today, I mentioned to you before we started the show that I've got this new camera. It's going to make things so much better, yada, yada, yada. And my wife goes to me today. I said, I couldn't get it all to work today. I spent hours and hours, and I'm disappointed. And she said, are you trying to be too perfect? I said, I know, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on. I said, sometimes I really don't know when to tone it down, because as a practical matter, sometimes you really do, or try to figure out how you still can make that 120% and somehow still tone it down and make everything fit. But I just went to her and I said, this is the vision that I have for what I can present. Mm-hmm. And I'm ready to step up to that next level that will distinguish me from some of the other commercial real estate people who are starting to catch up to me. I got to stay ahead of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I teach a course on business development and on negotiation as well. And in my negotiation class, and it has application to business development as well, but in my negotiation class, one of the very first things I talk about are the 5 essentials that need to be in place for successful negotiation. The very first one is aspiration. And the reason that I talk about that is because there have been studies done that have proven that a person with higher aspirations will out-negotiate a more skilled negotiator, just basically because you're going in with a higher level of expectation of an outcome. And I think that that also applies to you, certainly, and I'd like to believe for me as well, in the way that we approach our work on an everyday basis. Now, I will admit, it does come with a few downfalls, Howard. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit of a workaholic.
Oh, yeah.
And, it just goes with it. And also the other problem is I don't do, this is not a disparaging comment to Microsoft, but I heard this from someone, that Microsoft will release at 80% good, knowing that they're going to do updates in the future. The problem with real estate transaction is once you've done the transaction, there isn't an update that you can introduce later.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
So you got to go in and you got to be perfect on the first time through, I think.
Absolutely. It reminds me, there's a television commercial that goes something where a patient is about to have surgery, asks the nurse, how's the doctor? Yeah, he's okay. That's not really what you want to hear.
No, that's not what you want to hear.
So when I talk about, that's kind of the first step, is aspirations. What do you expect of yourself? The second step is you got to know your client.
Yes.
So if you're the client, what is it that you expect from your broker? And all of this, and if you want to look at the outline to remind you, but all of this sends signals to the client.
Yeah, I'm going to have to freewheel this one, Howard, because I've got to pull the outline up on my computer before the show because we started a little bit early. But I will tell you what I expect.
Okay.
I expect them to really get to know not only my objectives as a company, but also my objectives as a person. What are my personal objectives? I want them to also understand that they can't do that if they just show up and throw up. In other words, it's all about them. No, it isn't. It's all about me. I want you to learn about me. It's not that I have an ego, but I feel that if you know everything that there is to know about me as a client, then you'll be able to perform better. You'll know my temperament. You'll know my expectation of urgency. You'll know how I like things packaged so that it makes my job easier because I've got a lot of things on my plate at any one given point in time. So that's what I expect. I expect them to ask open-ended questions, to really listen, not listen to answer, not listen to give me their sales pitch, but to really listen, to write down, to get to know me. You don't have to buy me lunch, you don't have to buy me dinner, but just sit down and understand where I'm coming from. I hate it when I'm having to tell them because they didn't ask the question in the first place. I much prefer that they ask me, and that's a first sign of me deciding whether or not I want to hire you as my agent. Are you listening to me? Are you really wanting to get to know me? Because that's another aspect of how I think they are going to act in the marketplace in a negotiation. Is it just going to be that they're not going to listen to the other side? Or are they really going to listen to the other side to come up with the best possible negotiation for what I want to have happen?
Asking questions and the ability to listen. To me, that's primary. And when you ask questions and you listen, you do signal. And I want to make a clarification here. You were talking as if you're the client. Not,
yes, I was.
Yeah.
No, as the client.
Yeah. If I ask enough questions and I dig down, not just particularly when I ask questions and the client has to think about it. Mm-hmm. They recognize that I know more than maybe them, or I know enough to help them.
Yeah, let me tell you a story. It's a personal story. It has application to this conversation. And I love telling stories. If anybody's attended any of my training or has worked with me, you'll know I'm full of stories. But this one goes back to when my family relocated from Indonesia. We lived in Indonesia for a while. We relocated back to North America. My son was going into grade 2 at the time. And the first day of class, the teacher had mentioned to the whole class that there were 3 children that had joined the class from countries other than the country in which we were now living. And we found out that one of the other classmates had been living in Hong Kong. And as a result of that, to cut a long story short, my wife made a coffee lunch date with the mother of this other boy from Hong Kong. And they ended up having lunch. At the end of the day, I come home from work and I said, how was your lunch with this other lady? Her name's Sandy, by the way. How was your lunch with Sandy? My wife said, she's a wonderful person. I got along famously with her. And I said, so tell me about her. And she paused. And she went, you know something? I don't know a thing about her. She asked me questions the entire time. She knows all about me. I don't know about her. But what I drew out of that was my wife didn't know anything about her, but thought she was a wonderful person because she was interested in what my wife had to say. Now, we've been friends ever since. And that's a friendship that has spanned well over 25 years now. And yes, we do know Sandy and her husband and all their kids, and they know us very well as well. But it was that interaction. So if you're a real estate agent and you're watching this today, take the example of my wife and Sandy. Be like Sandy. Ask questions. Your client will like you because you're interested in them.
Yeah, that works in nearly every way. One of the things, and I'm going to tell a story now.
Okay.
I would recommend that if you're going to meet or talk to a client or a lead or a potential client, then maybe you should do a little bit of research on them. And I say this because I'll give you an example of the story. As you recall, I interviewed Steve Forbes, and I was very excited about interviewing him. So beforehand, I got my hands on as many things as I could about him, including his family history, how the Forbes fortune came up. I got quotes from his grandfather, and on and on and on. And during the interview, I asked him about his grandfather. And then I quoted his grandfather, and he was very surprised that anybody would research him that much before
you know, that's shocking. That's actually shocking. It's very, because it obviously struck a chord that a lot of people who have interviewed him, and he's a very interviewed person, that they wouldn't have done that kind of research. So you really stood out.
Yeah, no, maybe it's just that he didn't expect it from me because all I had was this live stream blog, and it's not a big media empire, but I've been around long enough to do that. Let's move on. So you got to have the aspirations, you got to want to excel, you got to know the client.
Yep.
And that has all kinds of benefits if you do know the client, ask questions, etc. You also have to know who you are. Pilgrim, know thyself. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that from your perspective?
Well, I'll speak for myself as a broker now, not as a person buying brokerage services. For me, I know the type of client I want to work with. I know that my personality, and I know the type of personality that I interact well with. So if I don't feel that there's a fit from a personality standpoint, if I don't feel that I will be able to perform, I don't feel that I have the skill set for that particular assignment, I would rather be honest and upfront with the person and say, you know what, we're not a fit for one reason or another. And hopefully I can make a recommendation to somebody. It's very important for me to enjoy what it is that I'm doing. And Howard, I've been doing this, I'm in my 40th year in commercial real estate. And I had an
marvelous, darling.
Well, what's really funny, and it ties right into what we're doing. I was teaching at a real estate board this week, and somehow it came out that I'm 61 years old. And someone said to me, well, Peter, you don't look 61. The passion that you're having for this business, the way you act, is not 61. And, I think what it comes down to is being comfortable in myself with what I do, who I do it with, and I'm not stressing. Uh, life's too short, particularly now at my age. At 61, I would like to say I have the luxury to say I can turn things down. But by the same token, I think this actually happened a long time ago when I realized you're only going to go around once. Know thyself and work well within what it is that you want to do, and stay within your wheelhouse. One of the things I like to tell people is if you don't want to do what you're doing, stop it, because it's not going to get any better.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You have to know what your skills are, your knowledge is, experience, and that's easy for me and for you to say, because we've been through the cycles of thinking that we knew what we were doing and talking about, only to find later on that I didn't know it quite as much as I thought.
Yeah.
But you have to know yourself to make sure that you're the right person for the job. You have to know yourself to determine, particularly for a broker, if you need to bring in other people, a team, so that you can give the best job. For me, I'd rather bring in a team that gave the best service and bring in more business and take a smaller piece of the pie than try to gobble it all myself. And I will tell you, my experience with brokers is that's not typical.
No, it isn't. And I have a friend. His name is Rick Chichester. He's the CEO of Ferris Lee in Orange County.
Yeah.
And he actually, with his clients, because he still maintains clients, a small client list, but he maintains clients. And if they have an assignment that he feels his company is not well suited for, he will say, "We're not well suited for this. You need to go to somebody else." And on all of his agents that work at his brokerage, they all work in teams, and those teams can morph over time if those specialties, those special requirements are needed. And I think that that's the sign of moving yourself up to a trusted partner. Because if you say you can do it and you don't, you've just killed yourself for any future business.
Yeah, you're right.
Because the guy's going to say you didn't perform. Oh, and as an aside, Howard, my firm conducted a study of hundreds of real estate buyers of services, and we did surveys of what they wanted and why they hired the real estate agent that they hired. And we took all of those answers and we distilled it down to 3 attributes. And the third attribute, so it's not the number 1 attribute, but the third attribute is performance. You have to perform. If you can't perform, you can't get in the door. And so if you perform poorly, you say you can do something and you can't do it, then you're out the door. You're not going to get any more business. And also, it's going to go through the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say, under promise, over perform.
Always.
Yeah, you got to manage expectations, and that's very important. How important? Did I already ask this question? Market knowledge? No, I didn't.
No, you haven't.
I knew I was getting there. Senior moment. How important is market knowledge?
Very, very important. Because you're not actually in the real estate business. You're in the market intelligence business. Your job is to know the market better than your clients, I think. My job is to get to the point whereby I am solving my clients' problems that they're going to have tomorrow, today. And in order to be able to do that, I need to know the marketplace.
What does market knowledge mean to you?
Well, market knowledge means not only the demographics or the rental rates or the basic facts and figures. It's divining where the market is going to go into the future. Because I don't know of any real estate owner or any business person, for that matter, of any stripe, that wants to know what happened yesterday, because they can turn on the news and see what happened yesterday. They want to know what's going to happen tomorrow. Every successful CEO that I know is future looking. Steve Jobs, probably the preeminent future looking CEO on the planet at the time. I know a lot of other ones, and they want to know what's the market going to do. They don't want to know what it's doing today. They want you to say, based on your experience, based on your knowledge, based on you being so intimately involved in this market, can you tell me, can you shine my crystal ball a little bit better than I can? Can you tell me what could potentially happen? What don't I know that I don't know that could hurt me or benefit me?
Yeah. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was very good at knowing what you wanted before you had any clue what it was.
Yeah, and you put it into Alexa.
Yeah. Or Lisa. Wasn't it Lisa?
Yeah.
In
Lisa,
any
I don't
event.
know what his is. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's listening.
Yeah. What about, and this is something I'm learning certain things about myself. Recently, I had a conversation with a former client who's become a good friend of mine. He's a broker in Texas. And we were talking about, me trying to do, the business, building up a business, doing social media, emails, and then doing the 150 to 200 calls a day thing. And I just said I was struggling. And somewhere in the conversation, it came up with, you're highly detailed, Howard. And I just never thought of myself that way. But now, once he said it, I started thinking about it going, yeah, I am detailed. When
That's what makes you a good lawyer, too, because
well,
good lawyers have to be detailed.
it's not just, paying attention to the obvious. But when I'm trying to figure out a case or I'm trying to, find a location for a client, in a lawsuit in particular, I would do things, I would think it out to the umpteenth degree, if that's a word, and I would do and say things so that they would emotionally react in a certain way. This is kind of like the perfect world scenario that I went through. We had things so planned out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would, if I was trying to collect, I would sometimes, for the people who I knew were lying to me and owed a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
I would start subpoenaing their mothers and their fathers and their children. And I wouldn't take his car away from him. I'd take his wife's car away from him.
Yeah.
So I would do all of these things to make them heal. I know
Remind me
that
never to cross
sounds
you.
terrible, but
Remind me never to cross you, Howard. Remind me never to cross
no,
you.
I always felt that I was a very fair person. I don't beat up on someone that it doesn't deserve it. It was just the bad people that I went after like that. So, yeah, I guess I'm a detailed person. But this is kind of goes to what we talked about before also. Don't get lost in the details. So this is like your son.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a difference between getting lost in the details and absorbing the details. One of the things that I'm personally known for, both in my consulting and in my previous positions, such as with the REIT as the chief operating officer, is the ability, and you have the ability as well, and I think a good broker also has this ability to take two pieces of information and mesh them together and come up with an unforeseen solution. And I know that you're heavily involved with opportunity zones, for an example. Now, the detail for you is that I don't think there's a word about opportunity zones that you haven't read. So you're ingraining that into your DNA. And because of that, if someone wants to know about opportunity zones and how it can apply to them and a creative solution around it, I think you'd probably have that for them. And that's what I look for when I was hiring a broker. Someone that could say, okay, this is what's happening in the marketplace. This is what you're dealing with. And based upon all of this, this is my recommended solution. And it might be a little out of the box, or it might be something I haven't thought about. That's what I think about. When I think of details, I think about, yes, get the details, but then just let them percolate and sit there.
Yes.
Don't focus on the detail. Just focus on what does it ultimately mean. And I think actually that's what you do.
Yeah. That's me to a T. And again, going back to something that someone said about me that at the time I didn't understand. In my high school yearbook,
Oh,
they, you know,
you
they
mean
would,
last year?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm going to my 50-year high school reunion in a couple of months. Could you imagine that? But
I know.
in the yearbook, they used to write a little saying about you. And in mine, I remember bringing it home. My mother looked at it and she said, "Oh, that's so you." And what they wrote was, "He has the will, now he'll find the way." And I had no clue what that meant. I mean, I was kind of like, huh? But I
Yeah.
guess that's been me my entire life. You're right. It's like, wait a second, give me the problem. One of my favorite jobs was director of real estate and general counsel for Allied Education Corporation. And I became in that company the problem solver.
Hmm.
People would come to me with the weirdest problems, things
Hmm.
that in a million years I would never have thought of. And they'd walk out the door and I would go, huh? I have
Yeah.
no clue. All right, let's think about it. And I would come up with a solution. So I think that's important. If you're looking for a broker, I think you need to understand that. Now, let's talk a little, go back, take a step back, and I'm going to skip the process part of this because we're probably, we'll see. Maybe I'll go back to that. Knowing the client.
Yes.
It's important to understand how the client prefers to be communicated with. Why don't we talk
Yes.
a little bit about that? Some of it may seem obvious, some of it may not.
Well, I think that the communication with the client is multifold. Number one, you have to understand their personality and their temperament. And the most successful real estate agents that I know, the most successful business people that I know, will match their communication style to their client's communication style, both in tone and in frequency, and I'll add a third one in the medium, the methodology of communication. So I've had clients that were A-type personalities, and they talk like this all the time, and they're very, very fast, and they expect me to talk the same way. Just give me the facts, ma'am, and I'll make my own decision about it. So if I walked in with a southern drawl and was very slow, it would not work. So, you match that. I had a rule when I was with Colliers International and running a number of offices that we had email-free Fridays, except if the client wanted communication by email. So if the client wanted communication only by email, then and everything written, then that's what they got. So matching personality, matching tone, matching how they want to receive their information is very, very important, as well as the medium. I remember one person telling me, I just want the facts. Don't give me hyperbole. Don't give me a long-winded story. Just tell me right up front, and then let me decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, made my job very easy because they didn't ask for suggestions or recommendations, and I had many. But what they wanted was the facts, and they wanted their personality style was, I have to control everything. I have to make the final decision, and just be my conduit of information. I had another person that was completely opposite. If I just gave them the facts without a recommendation or my thought process on options, and they wanted options, normally what would happen is facts, options, recommendation. That's what they wanted. Then if I didn't do that, then they felt that I wasn't giving them service. So really get to understand how they want to be communicated with, both in tone and in message, and that third one, the medium.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've had all kinds of different clients. Most of my clients, particularly those who were with me a long time, liked the fact that I would explain things to them.
Mhm.
So my emails tended to be a little bit long and winding, etc. And because these people were very busy, I changed the format of my emails. So they wanted to know what it was that they should be doing. So it was important in most instances for me to explain my thinking and rationale so that they would understand it. And then they would, if they didn't agree with it, they would ask a question, etc. But the format of my emails then changed. Because what I usually did for those kind of clients is I would give them my conclusion first. And, if you're interested, read on.
Yes, and you know what that is? That's the journalist's inverted pyramid. So my wife was a journalist. That's how we met. She was a newsreader at a radio station, and I'm very familiar with that inverted pyramid. You know, you look at any news story, and if you were to take a media release writing course, they would say, give the headline, give the salient points in the first paragraph, ideally in the first sentence, and then the least amount of pertinent information is at the very bottom so that the editor can chop off the bottom of the pyramid. And cut it for length, right? So I just naturally have gone to that. But, I've had some clients, all they want is the headline. They don't want anything behind it. Other clients want that. I want my recommendation up front, and then fill in the details as to why you and how you came to that. That's perfectly fine.
Actually, I like the process of writing down the thought process itself. And so what I usually do is I do my research. I put all the data together. I start writing it out, and I don't really know what my conclusion's going to be. So as I go through and I write it all out, all of a sudden I come to the conclusion. Then I take that conclusion and I move it all the ways to the top so that it makes sense for me. And as I said, sometimes, if the client, I've had clients say, don't send me all this stuff. How often should you communicate with a client?
As often as they want you to communicate. That's one of the first questions I always ask my clients. Whether it's a consulting client or a training client. And it's interesting, I met with my financial advisor the other day, and he said, and how often would you like me to communicate with you? And I thought, brilliant, I like you already. It was a brand new financial advisor that I was talking to. And so I think that the optimum answer is as often as they want. But if something's going wrong, and I will say this right up front, if something is going wrong, don't wait. Don't hide it. Don't try to brush it under the rug. If something's going wrong, now's the time to pick up the phone right away and be transparent and let them know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and communicate with them in a way that makes sense and in the tone that they want. Because if something's going wrong and the person just wants to make up their own mind, fine. But if something's going wrong and they want a recommendation or a suggestion, be prepared to provide that to them as well.
Absolutely. I have had, on at least one occasion, my clients are far more forgiving of me than I am. It's just that they know that I don't know what their expectations are. I know what my expectations are. And if I don't deliver up to my expectations, then it bothers me. And I've had, on at least one occasion, gone to a client and said, I'm writing $5,000 off the bill. Mm-hmm. And he said, why? I said, because I made a mistake. I advised one of your property managers about something, and I was wrong. I wasn't giving him my opinion. I was wrong on the legal advice. And fortunately, nothing happened. But I felt that I should take responsibility that giving wrong advice, giving an opinion that the client doesn't want to follow, that's fine.
Yep.
Giving a strategy that may or may not work, and just so happens that your strategy doesn't work out, that's okay too. Not that often, because if all I ever did was give bad advice in terms of strategy, no one would ever want to be around me. But giving them the wrong facts. This is what the notice means. This is what the law says. And I haven't made that mistake often, but I was outraged at myself. And I almost like, hey, it's going to cost me $5,000. There you go. And the client's like, no, you don't have to do that. I said, no. I also think of it this way. You want to talk about creating loyalty?
Mm-hmm.
You go to a client, you say, I'm writing $5,000 off because I made a mistake that you didn't even know about, and you would have never known about it unless I told you.
Yeah, but Howard, hang on a second. I no, and I want to say this, and I want to be 100% genuine in what I'm saying, and it's going to come off backwards, and I'm doing this somewhat on purpose. What you said is 100% true and was 100% genuine, but it sounds a little. I'm doing it in order to retain loyalty. It sounds a little smarmy, and I know that's not how you mean it. But what I think you mean is this, and it goes partially to my comment about transparency and the whole thing about communication. And this is the number one thing that really irks me about people that I've hired as agents and then subsequently fired, or people that have worked with me that I've subsequently had to say, it's not working out, we're going to part ways. And those are people that do not take responsibility for their actions. And you ask me how I hold myself up. I hold myself up to be responsible. I hold myself up to be responsible for my word and my actions. I expect other people to do the same thing as well. I don't have any time for a backstabber, and I've had that happen in the brokerage community where people have gone around behind me, right? We've all had that happen. And we get upset. Yet, do we look introspectively and say, are we as responsible ourselves? And what you were really doing for that client when you wrote off the $5,000 was you were being responsible for your error. And
Yes.
you were being transparent in that. And I use the word transparency again because lo and behold, Howard, that was number 2 on our survey. And you don't know about my survey. I haven't told you about my survey. But that was number 2 on our survey. So the number 3 position was performance. Number 2 was transparency. And within transparency was responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with you. But the fact that it helps develop loyalty doesn't hurt.
Well, it develops loyalty only because it's so scarce and
Yes.
rare in this industry. And I want to make us the norm, not the exception, by broadcasting this show and saying, for heaven's sakes, folks, be responsible.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know how I could say that more. A lot of what we're talking about is applicable in any business, not just real estate brokers. I mean, if you're dealing with other people, these are some of the things that I would love to see. And I don't mean to trash the brokerage community, but there's a lot of this that doesn't. We expect certain things from ourselves that distinguishes us from many, many other brokers. And I find it very frustrating.
Yeah, but as you point out, it's in every industry. You're not trashing brokerage by any way, shape, or form. And what we're talking about, and for some reason, we get caught up in business. And I don't care what business you're in. If you're, a real estate agent, if you're a lawyer, if you're a consultant like me, or a trainer like me, we get caught up in the shiny new car. We get caught up in the technology. We get caught up in everything else. And one of the things that I find most interesting is in a lot of industries, I hear the people in that industry say, "Oh, my industry is different. It's a people industry," and we're so caught up in, and I hear it all the time about real estate. Oh, this city's different, or this industry is different because it's a people industry. And yet we're looking at what is the shiny new technology that is going to make us more productive, give us the advantage and everything else. What we're talking about, Howard, if you think about it, and we got a lot more to talk about, but it's what we taught our 5-year-old. It's be responsible, be respectful, ask, don't talk, don't chew with your mouth full, or talk with your mouth full, chew with your mouth full, but don't talk with your mouth full, those kinds of things. Somehow we miss them. And the really good agents, the brokers that stand out, and there are many of them, uh, know to be responsible, to communicate properly, to be passionate about their business.
Let's talk a little bit about back to the market knowledge thing,
Yeah.
because I have a couple of instances, and I think that as a broker, and let's talk about if you're representing a tenant, or a buyer. I expect one of the things is, and this is a pet peeve because we recently, my wife and I recently purchased a home and we went to some residential real estate agents and it was a miserable experience. Their expectation of what they should be providing. I mean, anybody could go online and get something from Redfin or whatever. So I don't need people to do that. And commercial tenants can do that also. But never did they preview any of the properties that they sent to us. They never physically went to it. And I
Yeah.
think that previewing the property, one, and previewing the area, just driving around, letting your brain figure out what's going on. First of all, you'll see a lot of stuff that's
Hmm.
not on an online listing service.
Yes.
That's number one. Two,
Yeah.
you'll see, and you have to understand this, is if you preview a property, any broker who has a listing, if they're going to present it online on a listing service or anywhere else, they're going to present it, they should be presenting it in a way that's going to get the hook in.
Hmm.
Let me get the hook in so that let me get your interest. They're not going to lay out all of the problems online.
No,
You
no,
know,
of course they're not. And when you were saying that, I chuckled for a couple of reasons. One, what you said is one of the things that is in one of my courses. If you before you go showing, preview the property, and we have a lot of tools that we can use to preview, such as going on Google Earth or Google Maps and do the street view and do the aerial view and the satellite view and things of that nature. But the reason I was chuckling is I remember that before I even engaged a realtor when we moved to Glendale, California, I drove around all over Ventura County, LA County, and around to try and find where we might want to live. And I was helped by my wife, who was sitting at a computer, and she'd say, "Okay, here is a list of the addresses that I'm kind of interested in. Would you go take a look at them?" This is before we engaged a real estate agent, okay, just to take a look at it. And this one time, my wife says, "Oh, I think I found the perfect house. You got to go see it." And so I get the address. I go to the house, and I drive up to it, and I look at it, phone my wife, and I said, "Sweetheart, are you on the computer?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, put the address into Google Earth, and I want you to back up," because she just looked at the brochure. To your point of, they just fire off the brochure on the online. They don't tell you all the bad things. And I said, "Okay, if you back out just a little bit." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's the freeway that runs over top of the house. It's not beside that. It's over top of the house. And there's high power lines immediately adjacent to it. I don't think we're going to be buying this house." Can you imagine the real estate agent driving up with my wife and I saying, "This is the perfect house for you," and having not previewed that house? We'd wonder about their capabilities if they had already interviewed us and found out what it was that we wanted.
yeah, I think what clients should expect is to give them the insider's knowledge. You need to speak to the brokers, you need to speak to the landlords, you need all of that information. What's, as you had indicated, what might be moving in a half a mile down? That's the real market knowledge.
Yes.
That's so very, very important, and not the kind of stuff that is online and anybody can get to. And that requires work and it
Yes.
requires experience.
Yeah, and think of it this way, Howard. If I can get it online, why should I hire you?
Yeah.
If you want to be invaluable and you want to make yourself a partner rather than a commodity, and the internet is full of commodity, by the way, and there's very little loyalty on the internet. If you want to be as much a commodity as anything you'll find on the internet, be like the internet. But if you really want to be a stellar real estate agent and make a good living in this industry, and you can make a really, really good living in this industry, then stand out.
Great. I go. Oh, by the way, I'm working on this, Donna. We did get a comment from Donna Hazel, who's
Oh,
by the way, a really good travel agent. She has helped us, and she's a sister of Deborah Hazel, who's a
okay.
PR person. You probably know Deborah.
Yeah.
And she wrote a comment. So we need to work on this a little bit so that I pay attention to that kind of stuff, so that we carve out a little question and answer so I can read the comments. But as we start
We have
promoting
time.
this is the first real show that we've promoted.
Yeah.
So
And we have time. So what's the comment?
it's just great studio. And great discussion. Not my wheelhouse, but I'm learning a lot. But Donna, let me tell you something. This is just as applicable to you
Yes.
as it is to anybody else. When you have that special experience that people go to you, sometimes they're a little worried because they may feel that it's like going to a mechanic. I don't understand anything about cars and I know I'm going to get ripped off. That's only because you don't have their knowledge and experience and you don't know what you don't know, so it makes you uncomfortable. So Donna, as I said, this would apply just as easily to you. It applies to Deborah. Thank you very much for watching. And let's talk about shouldn'ts. What shouldn't we be doing as
As
brokers?
as a broker, we shouldn't work at a transactional level. I
And what
know.
does that mean? We
Well,
had
what I
this
mean by that
discussion
is,
before.
yeah, what I mean by a transactional level is where you're operating, where your client needs you to solve an immediate problem today, and then you're disposable. Once you solve that problem, you're disposable. I think that you should be at that level where you're anticipating your client's problems tomorrow and helping them solve it today. So that's the big one, number one. Number two, with transactional, the problem with transactional agents, and I can spot them a mile away. They hang as many signs as they possibly can and wait for the phone call. And they're on the volume business. They're not on the caring business. And one of the things I tell people when they're involved in my training is, we don't make widgets. We can't hide behind the widget. We are the widget. So we are ourselves. And so don't work just on volume. Again, I'll reference my friend, Mr. Chichester. He says that you cannot manage too many clients. If you're doing your job properly, you should have a small cadre of clients that will give you a lot of business frequently and for a long time. So I think that that's where you should go. You shouldn't be looking at, oh, I have a mailing list of 10,000 people. I actually had an agent say that to me. My mailing list is 10,000 prospects. No, that's not a mailing list. I mean, you don't have 10,000 prospects in your database. You're no longer in real estate. You're in the newsletter or the email business. You can't service 10,000 clients. It's just
No.
not going to happen. It goes back to your comment about 150 to 200 phone calls a day. That's not right. That's transactional. The other thing that you shouldn't do: lie, cheat, steal, be unethical. You shouldn't, as we talked about before, try to do things you're not capable of doing. Bring in the team members. You shouldn't treat this as a hobby, because it isn't. It is a business. You shouldn't treat yourself as an employee. You need to treat this as a business. So you're going to be out there prospecting. You shouldn't be beat up when you get beat down, when people say no time and time again. The no just means they're not ready for your service right now. you shouldn't onboard this personally. It's just business, and it's just they're not ready for your service just yet. So those are the big shouldn'ts for me. I know there's probably a million and one more I haven't touched on.
Well, I've got some personal peeves. If I were a client, and I have been a client, but if I were a client, it would really bother me if all I got from the broker was a list, or flyers.
Yeah.
And that I have to do more work. I think as a broker, really what you want to do is you want to make the job of the client as easy as possible. So frankly, I want a detailed analysis. I don't want to know that, well, there are 10 properties on the market that meet the general parameters that you've given to me, that you're looking for. Let's say I'm the client and I go, I'm looking for a 10,000 square foot warehouse with about 2,000 square feet of office space. And so the next thing is 3 or 4 days later, I'll get a list of available properties that are on the market.
Yeah, for 5,000 to 250,000 square feet.
Right. And that's all that you get. I mean, that is so typical. But as a client, I'd want to know some detail and analysis. Not only that, I'd want the client, and this goes back to what we started out with, asking the right questions. I'd want a broker to come to me and say, well, why do you need 10,000 square feet? Why do you need 2,000 square feet? How many people are you going to put in it? Is it okay if it's on the second floor?
Yeah.
I want to know, do you need, is it important if you need a rail line?
Yeah.
What about height, etc.? Now, I know brokers like Alan Buchanan. Yeah, Alan Buchanan. Yeah. I know that he asks all of those questions. He doesn't just run out and go, here's this, here's some square feet. No. So, that would irk me like crazy, that someone did is go online, pull up something at a CoStar, sent it over to me and say, what do you think?
I've had residential agents do that as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, I'm looking for, and we've moved about every 5 years. So my wife has got, our requirements down pretty pat. And when we see a list that, we're looking for 1,500 square feet, and I see a list with houses of 3,000 square feet, I'm going, okay, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to upsell me? Because I don't want that. I'm in the process of my life. Oh, I'm downsizing. I'm leaving a 3,000 square foot house.
But if we're going to talk about residential agents, residential work is different from commercial. There's a lot more emotion. And people typically say, here's my budget. I can only afford $400,000 or $300,000, and this is what I want. And I think that it's appropriate for when the residential agent is showing properties to show them what $400,000 will get them and what $500,000 will get them, and say, well, what is it that you want? Do you want the $500,000 or do you want the $400,000? What are you interested in giving up? Because that's a process, and it does hold true for commercial property too.
I was just going to say, it does hold true for commercial property. You're looking at a budget range of $15 a foot in rent, but if you go to 18, you get on this street, you get this traffic flow, you get this, that's knowing your client. I mean, that shouldn't be a sort of a standard upsell. That's just knowing your client, right, and working for your client on that regard.
And you have to go out and preview it before you show it to the client. And sometimes you have to take the client knowing that this is not going to fit their requirements because they had expressed something to you. Maybe they'll change their mind. And it's not really upselling. It's just simply educating yourself about the client, knowing the client. So, do you have any final words before I execute you?
My final word today, Howard, is this. Be the best that you can be in this or any industry. And if you are, you will find your own passion. The downs won't feel as down. The highs will feel much higher. And you will have clients beating a path to your door.
Absolutely, and you'll have happy clients. And I couldn't agree with you more. That would be where you have to start. You've got to, find something that, or a way of doing something. We didn't talk much about process, but there are different ways of doing things.
Yes.
And you've got to find the thing that excites you, or the way of doing it that excites you. And if you do that, you'll be successful, because you will do things 120, 150%.
Agreed.
So I just want to let everybody know we've got our show next week, next Thursday at 4 o'clock. I think that's the 22nd of August. And,
I'll take your word for it.
Right. 22nd of August. It'll be at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will have two guests. One guest is Rex Heim, president of the California Business Properties Association. And Rex will be talking about the California's new proposed split roll tax initiative.
Okay.
Right? And that has something to do with Prop 13, if you've ever heard of that.
Yes.
And the people in commercial real estate business are trying to campaign against it. I'm actually opposed to it, and we'll talk about why at next Thursday's show.
Excellent topic.
Yeah, it's a great topic. And we're also going to be having Ira, it's either Meislick or Meslick.
I think it's Meslick.
Meslick, yes, I think so. I'm sorry, Ira. I've known Ira for as long as I've been doing the CRE radio and TV. He writes a blog. He's very knowledgeable. He's very prolific in his writing. He's recently wrote an article about a case that came down in the state of Washington, caught my attention, about operating covenants in leases. And it should be a really interesting for anybody who wants to know anything about, this provision. I wouldn't say it's an obscure provision, but it's not often talked about except for professionals in the business. And so that should be a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah, we should add that Ira is a lawyer based on the East Coast of the country. So he brings that legal background into it with you, and I'll just be a bystander sitting on the side in amazement as the two of you talk about.
No, don't go there. Don't go there, please. So, everyone, thank you for joining us on CRE Radio and TV Live. Hopefully by next week, whatever went wrong today, I will figure it out and straighten it out and discover new things to go wrong. It's funny there that when I did a lot of live theater,
Yes.
sometimes you just have a mental block on stuff. So I would often go through my entire show or part before a couple of hours before the show. And if I was singing something, my brain would all of a sudden, I forgot the words or something, and I'd mess something up. And then I'd go during the live show, I am not going to mess that up. And you know what? Rarely would I make the same mistake. I seem to always find another mistake that I could make in a live show. And that's part of the fun of doing live, which is why I like to do this. So, Peter, you have a great week. We will see you next week, and you have a great evening. That's all from CRE Radio and TV. Okay.